I'm Catherine.
I'm Theresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives.
All right, well, welcome back, everyone. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Pass the Baton Book's own Theresa Hoover. And Theresa, I know you had done a really awesome project with your band students this last year, and so we were hoping we could talk about that. But before we do, maybe you could just talk to us about what was your year like during this pandemic, just so we can kind of get an idea of what it was like to start.
Sure. So, as you probably know, I was teaching middle school band this last year, which was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade band. We started the year completely virtual, all online. And in March, we transitioned back into the classroom into a hybrid concurrent model where some of the students were in the classroom 2 days a week and then home the other days, and they would switch. Some students were at home the whole time. One thing that was complicated with this was that the kids were not allowed to play their instruments in the building. And then in May, we were allowed to then play instruments. So the being fully virtual and then not being allowed to play was kind of what inspired this project for me.
Yeah. So then can you tell us about this composition project? I guess it was Jody Blackshaw's 13 Moons. Can you describe it?
Yeah. Sure. So going back to the beginning of the year again, I knew that whatever we were doing, whether it was virtual, hybrid, in person, playing, not playing, whatever, that I really wanted to make sure that I exposed the kids to a lot of diverse music, diverse composers, and that also there was a big focus on creativity and letting the kids create music. So when I was preparing for the year, I was looking through resources that would support both of those things. And I found this piece by Jody Blackshaw. She actually created it sounds like as part of her PhD program.
Oh, cool.
She calls it composing pieces. So instead of, the score arriving with all of the individual student parts and everything laid out and all of the information right there on the page, instead she provides just pieces of the music. So for 13 Moons, it was 4 movements, north, east, south, and west. And with each movement, she would provide a melody, a scale that the kids would need to know in order to play that melody, the notes you need to know. And then she would either have a counter melody or an accompaniment part or an ostinato that went along with it. So instead of it being this, completed work, it was just the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, as an ensemble, you would learn all of those different pieces. And Jody Blackshaw provides an amazing resource of how to teach various compositional techniques along with that. So everything from what does soli and tutti mean? What does it mean to layer in parts? What is a round? So you teach those elements. And so you're teaching the musical components, you're teaching the compositional components, and then as an ensemble, you figure out how to put it together. What instrument's going to play the melody? What instrument will play the counter melody? Will you layer the voices? Will there be a solo? Will everyone play together? Will you add other elements to it, right? Are there going to be other maybe non-melodic components like percussive things, stuff like that? So the ensemble works together to make all of these choices and then create the final product. So what's neat about it is it's not the same thing twice. What my ensemble does is going to be completely different than what your ensemble does, or what my ensemble does this year could be completely different than next year. Mm-hmm. It's never the same thing. So that's kind of what the piece is all about. And I guess she based it on a book, 13 Moons on Turtle's Back, which was had some indigenous history to it as well.
Nice.
So, all right. So I got this piece. We were fully virtual. The whole ensemble thing wasn't a possibility, but we were still learning the melody. We were still learning the counter melodies. We talked about tone color during rehearsals, which was kind of cool. I would play, say the melody on a trumpet, and then I would have all the kids play along with me on Zoom. So I was playing, they were all muted. And then I would say, okay, now I want you to listen really closely. I'm playing trumpet, you're playing whatever your instrument is. What does that sound like? What does it sound like, my trumpet and your clarinet? And then we would talk about tone color and come up with words that would describe the sound they heard. And it was neat to see the different things. Obviously the tuba player had a very different perspective than the flute player when they heard them together. So we kind of did some things like that, over Zoom. We would experiment with layering, where like I would play, we say, okay, if you're a woodwind, you're going to play the melody the second time through, and then everyone's going to play the third time through, and turn your camera on when you play. So it would kind of like this visual aspect of layering. So we had to really be creative because the virtual stuff. But then, after we've learned this and we talked about all the compositional techniques, it's like, okay, we need to make it a something. And I did not want to just do another virtual band, where the kids are submitting video and recording. I just didn't want to do that for this. So instead, I put them in small groups. I let them, they had some say in who they would work with. So little groups of 3 or 4, and said, you need to create an arrangement of 13 Moons East. And I said, you have to use the melody. You have to use the elements that she's provided. You need to use some of the techniques that we've learned. You can use technology. You can use your instruments. I kind of left the door open for what they could do, but you needed to create something that you could present to the class. And we had been using Note Flight Learn already. So that was a great platform they had. The students have iPads, so they also had the option to use GarageBand if they wanted to. But yeah, it was like, you need to create something with this. And that part was really, really fun to watch them and to see, what they did. Each group got a jam board that they would kind of do some brainstorming on. They were in breakout rooms in Zoom. And then when we did transition into the classroom, they were usually still in breakout rooms because that was just the easiest. There would be some kids in the room, some kids at home. So they would go into breakout rooms. A lot of them put the melody into Note Flight. And then I originally had really wanted them to record themselves playing into Note Flight as well. With the iPads, we had a little bit of trouble on that. So it didn't work as smoothly. So a lot of them just used Note Flight to compose. But I would get questions like, so how do I write for a viola? Like, okay, here comes an interesting conversation,
Yeah.
Or they would like think of something that they wanted to hear. And then they would ask, like, can I do this with it? Can I include a string quartet with my French horns? Or one group, I don't remember how they got there, but they did something. And it was a group of trumpet players, and they had the different trumpet parts and they had it all layered. And they went and added something percussive. And the kid says, this sounds like island music. What other instruments could we use to make it sound like that? And, they start researching to see how they could put that kind of a twist on their composition.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. The older students, the 8th graders, they ended up with, I think I said it had to be 1.5 minutes long. And I also wanted a video component to it, which might have been pushing it a little bit, but and they had their final thing. The 7th grade students didn't have as many requirements. They didn't have to do video, and I think theirs had to be 1 minute long. But it was really fun, and it was really neat to watch them, taking those pieces and creating something out of that.
Yeah, like what I hear you saying is like the confidence that the kids had about like, composing, like, and the what if questions, like, diving into style, like, just that sounds so cool. So like, what would you say, what else did you see characteristics from the kids, during this project?
So it was neat because they had a lot of choice, right? I did ask their input on who they wanted to work with. And the way I did that was I said, we did a Google form, list 2 people you work well with. And I said, and if there's 2 people you don't work well with, please tell me that as well also. So that was, that was good for me to make the groups. It was kind of neat to see like the leadership characteristics come out. You'd have this group of 3 or 4 students, and who would be the one that took charge? Who was the one that was like, okay, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start doing this. So that was neat to see. But it just sounded like they loved the fact that they created something, and in their words, and it sounded good. Right. And I think part of the reason it sounded good was because, Jody Blackshaw gave us all of the elements to make it sound good. But they felt such pride in being able to create something that it was really powerful. The other thing that was really interesting, a lot of comments at the end, I gave them like a reflection form to fill out, how much they just liked working together. We were doing this project. It was like February, March, April-ish. And I think they were just lonely, a lot of them. And just to be able to interact and to work with other students to make music, right? That's half of what middle school band is, making music with your friends. I'd love to think that it's all about learning proper technique and things like that. But the fact is they want to make music with their friends. And this project gave them that ability in a time that they were really struggling to find that.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Well, and so that obviously was a really important thing to incorporate during a pandemic year, right? But would it be something that would be good to do outside of a pandemic in a classroom?
Yeah, I've actually thought about it a lot because, the way that we did it with the small groups, that was not at all what Jody Blackshaw intended, right? She thought this was to be a full ensemble piece. And I'm sure, so I think I would love to try it in that respect as well with a full group, and to go through the process of, coming up with that final product together and just being able to hear what it would sound like with an entire ensemble, right? And being able to actually hear a full clarinet section and all of the different voices and things like that. So I think that would be really neat. But I'd also love to, I think the small group thing was really cool.
Yeah.
And I think, you're putting limitations on it when you do that, because you're only saying you get maybe 4 voices to work with instead of, the entire ensemble. But I think the kids could do some pretty cool stuff with it, whether they composed for just their 4 voices and performed it. Like I would want them to perform it too, not just do it digitally like we did this time. But they maybe do that, and maybe they do create a backing track that goes with it. Maybe the piece was called 13 Moons. A lot of them, not a lot, I guess some of them took like a Halloween kind of spook idea to it. And the melody lent itself to that really nicely. But I could see some kids, creating a 4-part arrangement and then having like a kind of surreal background that they create in GarageBand or something. Like, I think that there's a ton of different opportunities of what they could do with this that would be really neat to do in person. So
yeah. And it sounds like too, from a teacher perspective too, like sometimes we get stuck with, well, how am I going to give choice to a whole ensemble? Like, well, then you could do it with small groups. But then like you said, that then there's a totally different experience with, you can do it with a whole ensemble, and
I think it's neat that it's a process. It's not just like you sit down on the first day and go, okay, this is what we're doing, done. I mean, the way I would picture it is, 1 week you try something, and then the next week you try something else, and then the next, and you try these different things, and then make some decisions based on what you heard. So I love that it's a process. Everybody can be involved, right? There's so many different ways to incorporate student voice, whether, they're raising their hand to offer suggestions, you're having them offer things digitally, they can vote on things. It just, you can involve all the students.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, what advice would you give teachers who maybe want to incorporate a project like this?
So, a lot of the things that we always say with these is like, start small, and that's true. But with this, you kind of do have to dive in. So I guess what I would say is find that really fine line between having a plan and being open to discovering where it's going to go. One of the nice things about this piece is, Jody Blackshaw does give you, they're not lesson plans word for word, but it's suggestions on how to teach all the concepts and suggestions on how to introduce things and that. So I think become really familiar with her suggestions and kind of have in mind, okay, first I'm going to teach this part, then we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. But don't make it so strict that there's not room for exploration,
Mm-hmm.
right? When somebody goes down a rabbit hole, you don't want to be tied to, oh, but we have to get done this today. You want to be able to explore that and see where it goes. And that's something that if I would do this again, I would do better with not deadlines, but like milestones, I guess is a good way to put it. For the kids having those little milestones, I really just didn't know when we were doing it, how long anything would take. So I left it very open, but I think the kids would have appreciated having some other milestones along the way. So I guess the advice is be flexible, have a plan, but be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
There's room.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And we learn so much, like, you know, we do it 1 year and then we get better the next year and on, right? I mean, and that's okay. And that's just how people learn, right? No one makes a home run the first time they do it. So
right. And I think that's just part of the process. And I think the kids appreciated it to a point. Like they liked that I wasn't constantly on them, like, okay, you have to have this done. You have to have this done. It was just more free, and they could experiment and they could go down a rabbit hole. And then when it got to the point that I was like, okay, I think we're making progress. Let's have a due date.
Yep.
Let's, figure this out.
And I think I remember reading in your blog post, you said something about there was like a midpoint where they all shared where they were, which was kind of a great way for you to kind of know, okay, where we are in the project as a whole.
Yes. Yeah. We did an almost ready performance, and it was not, I told them, like, this is not a finished product. It's not done, but you need to show us what you have so far and tell us what's coming, right? Like, what are you still working on? So each group had to present just wherever they were. And then we had a Padlet where other kids could leave feedback.
Which is awesome too.
Yeah. They were supposed to leave one piece of advice and one compliment.
Nice.
So that was a good way for them just to, to hear from some peers and to also receive encouragement that they were on a good track. But that helped me to be like, okay, this group's great. I don't have to worry about them. This group, on the other hand, I better make sure that I spend some time in their breakout room so that I can, facilitate and help them along. Because we know that creativity doesn't always follow a timeline, doesn't always fit in a box, but we also have to look at deadlines as a fact of life, right? We have to know that that's going to be something. So I wanted to work with them. There were some kids though who, we had the final presentation day and they kept tweaking a little bit afterwards. And that's fine.
Sure.
It's process.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Right. All right. Well, then is there anything, I mentioned a blog post. So how would people connect to this project or connect with you any further on?
So I did put a blog post up on my blog, which is www.offthebeatenpathinmusic.com. And obviously you can find me on social media at Music Theresa. I would love to, share my experience, but also hear about what other people are doing and just how they are using something like this with their students.
Yeah. And I think you had in the blog post too, the school, like some examples of the kids' work, right? The Jamboard and stuff. That's kind of fun.
Yeah. I tried to put up some, because we did tweet throughout the year, and I showed some different images on social media that the kids were working on. So you can see those as well.
Yeah. It's kind of nice to see what it really looked like too. So.
Yeah. And they're middle school kids. So it's funny too. Some of it you're looking at and you're like, oh yeah, you're 12.
Yep.
But that's also, they got to put their personality into it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that was important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing with us today.
Of course. Thanks for the opportunity.
This is part 3 of a 3-part series on creativity through music composition. If you haven't watched part 1 or 2, you'll want to go back and listen. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you subscribe below.
And follow us on social media. I'm at Musical Theresa.
I'm Singing Finch 1.
And you can follow the hashtag Pass the Baton Book.